Okay, I think in the interest of time, we'll get started, and I'm sure more people will join as we go. Um, Hello, everyone. My name is Vlad Kavalewski, and I'm a program manager at the Global Disaster Preparedness Center, which is a reference center hosted jointly by American Red Cross and IFRC. And I'm very excited to welcome you at our second webinar in our series about reaching the last mile, evidence and practice for more inclusive and effective early warning, which kind of we convene to share findings and recommendations and some interesting and important insights from the research that we supported across 14 countries in the world that focused on kind of early warning needs and specifics for hardest to reach communities and groups. And today, just a few housekeeping notes before we dive in. Just a heads up that this webinar is being recorded, and we'll share the recording and summary, kind of key takeaways after the webinar with all of you. But yeah, if you don't want to be caught on camera, just keep your camera off. And then, as I said, the chat is open. So if you would like to introduce yourself, feel free to use it to just, say who you are, where you come from, which organization that you represent. So, it can be a way to connect with other attendees as well. And then, we'll have after all the presentations, we'll have a dedicated time for Q&A and discussion. But if you have any question, if a question pops up in your mind as our presenters presenting, just feel free to use the Q&A feature, which is also on, to post your question there, and then we'll kind of go back to it and answer it during our Q&A session. Yeah, and so what's, again, just a little bit of background. I don't know how many of you attended the first webinar in the series that we hosted a couple of weeks ago. But as I said, we kind of organized this series to help, share and further promote the amazing findings that came out of the research that we supported across, as I said, 14 countries in the world. And the kind of the framing of that research was, again, focus on identifying what's working and what's not working for in terms of early warning and early action systems for those so-called last mile communities, the communities that are kind of hardest to reach and typically underserved or under-resourced by any formal kind of systems and services. And as you see, like, the studies were conducted all over the world. They focused on very different and diverse populations, from people living in extreme poverty to persons with disabilities to kind of women from marginalized communities to kind of indigenous populations. Over the course of the 4 webinars we'll be sharing, we invited the researchers who did that research, and they'll be sharing their findings and recommendations and kind of what it means for us as practitioners. As I said, that's a series of webinars. We had the first one on June 9th, and today is our second webinar, and we'll have 2 more in July. So if you have not signed up for those yet, feel free to use the QR code, or later I'll send the link in the chat so you can sign up for the remaining 2 sessions in the series. And also, just to flag that we also took all the amazing research that the researchers did, and we produced the meta-synthesis report that looks looks at all the findings across different contexts, across different kind of population groups, and also finds kind of commonalities, and also helps identify those key barriers and key enablers for more effective and inclusive early warnings for those last mile communities. So again, if you have not checked out our report, use the QR code to access it, or as I said later on, I'll send the link in the chat. And yeah, the findings in the report organized around the four pillars of early warnings, and then also it provides kind of more concrete and action-oriented recommendations for policymakers and practitioners on what to do to make early warning and early action systems more inclusive and accessible to those marginalized groups. And again, for many of you working in this space, this may not sound like a rocket science. A lot of those findings and a lot of good practices, we already know that they work, but I think this report is just like a very, very powerful evidence compilation and advocacy and policy influencing tool, because it shows that even though we know those are the good practices and those are things that are important for early warning systems, but they're not being practiced on they're not being actually implemented on the ground when you look at the how communities covered by existing early warning systems. And yeah, so today we are joined by three of the researchers who did their research under our grants program. And kind of the central question that we're gonna that kind of unites all these three research projects, and that we'll try to respond to during their presentations, is that what does an early what or like who does the early warning system fail to see because of where people live, who they are, or how decisions are made at the local level, and what would it take to reach one. So basically, we'll look at how identity, geography, language, and kind of local government system determine whom early warning system reaches, and if communities are counted as covered, it's not necessarily that everyone in that geography or in that community kind of is being reached by warnings, and what we can do to change it. And as I said, we're joined by three amazing researchers. Abdullah Rahman from Vietnam, whose research focused on early warnings for deaf and hard of hearing communities. Then Sifo Felix Mamba from University of Eswatini, who looked at drought warning specifically for farming and kind of remote communities. And then Ita Bonner from Agricultural University of Tirana, Albania, who also looked at kind of early warning systems for geographically remote communities. Yeah, as I said, without further ado, I'm gonna hand it over to our researchers, but just a reminder that our next webinar will take place on July 8th. And yeah, if you have not signed up yet, I'm gonna share the link shortly. So feel free, make sure you sign up for other webinars in the series. And yeah, without further ado, I'm gonna hand it over to Abdul for his presentation. Abdul, if you want to mute and start by introduction before while I'm pulling up your presentation.
Okay, thanks, Vlad. We are too polite to each other. I was waiting for you until you got my slides. But hi
Yeah.
everybody. I'm presenting from Ho Chi Minh City, Vietnam. It's about 7 p.m. here, so I apologize if I look a little bit tired. But I promise that I will not bore you with a lot of things. I'm just going to focus on a few insights that I have identified through the research. Was it in 2024? I think it was in 2024. The insights was gathered from a group of deaf and hard of hearing communities in Vietnam. So many of you have probably familiar working with the disabled populations. You might know that the existing studies or existing interventions have kind of been generalized across different disabled groups. But that is why I was trying to focus on a specific group, which is the deaf and hard of hearing communities. So whenever you find this slide deck,
Hmm.
flag, feel free to display it.
Yeah.
Yes, so this is the original title of the report, Breaking the Circuit of Information Poverty, Early Warning Messages, and Deaf and Hard of Hearing Communities in Vietnam. So bear with me because there are several insights that I'm trying to compress everything within 10 or 12 minutes. Next slide, please. I'm just going to start from these two perspectives. As Flat mentions, as well as the report mentions, that there is always a claim that 100% geographic reach. So the existing early warning metrics conflict geographic proximity with information access. So put it in a real world, it would be something like if you are a non-hearing individual and then you're standing next to a siren, it's highly likely the early warning message will not reach you. So this is the example of how geography sometimes don't matter if it is excluding the life experience of the certain populations. And therefore, we need to kind of rewire how practitioners, like in this case, the designers of early warning messages, define coverage to shift from mapping physical towers to mapping identity, language, and sensory access. In a simple word, it means we need to include the life experience of the people that we would like to become the recipient of the messages. Next slide, please. Um, so on my left side on your screen, it is something that we already know. Modality one is about sirens and loudspeakers, the use of sirens and loudspeakers. These are traditional tools that we always use or found when we are talking about early warning messages or early warning signals. So it is very, very massive. It can easily reach to broader communities. However, it also poses the sensory barriers. As I mentioned earlier, if you are unable to hear, if you are non-hearing communities, then highly likely anything that involve audios or voices or sounds will not reach you. And then modality two is like the existing informations pertaining to disaster in general is conveyed in the way that's very, very detailed, a lot of paragraph and text. It's very, very condensed in terms of messages and text. So what happened then? So in this case, if you are, for example, a sign language users, sometimes you don't really get or capture the whole messages because the signing systems are different from the speech-based system. And in addition to that, since you're living in an ecosystem that is very, very exclusionary, so you are being prevented or have limited access to educations because not many schools or formal education system offer sign language interpreter. So in that regard, your ability to kind of comprehend early warning messages or disaster information is kind of very, very limited. And then modality number three has to do with national TV sign language. The sign language, the messages about disaster, exists in the public televisions. However, the signing system used is very, very standardized. So it means if you are familiar with the geography of Vietnam, the northern signing system, the northern signings language system will be used across the nations. However, people who live in the central and southern Vietnam probably will not be able to capture all the signings. So in this regard, we're thinking about the identity and linguistic barriers that cannot be reached if the traditional modality of early warning system kept being used. Next slide, please. And what happened, what they do in response to the existing barriers, and this is just an example, yeah? So official broadcast. So let's say there is a raw material from mainstream TV news that shows a storm path. So the DHS leaders then is going to observe the visuals and ask trusted hearing family members to summarize the complex official announcement. So it means there is a hearing individual in the loop. So there is a bridge interactions that's going to translate what's happening on, let's say, on mass media, and then how it's going to be useful for the hearing or non-hearing individual. And the next step would be involving the co-development and co-creations and co-productions and reproductions of the existing materials that being captured and being discussed together between the hearing and non-hearing individuals. And the last part, step number 4, this is the most important part, which is then they will be sharing the co-productions, the message that has been co-produced, co-developed within the micro network. So for example, small Facebook group, or probably in this case, in the context of Vietnam, is Zalo. Zalo is like WhatsApp, but only being used in Vietnam. So what does it mean to practitioners? So if you would like to kind of design design early warning messages. So think about this kind of micro infrastructures network online become a highly efficient life-saving infrastructure. So this small group usually become the first place to go to if something happened, ask questions, rather than they going to the leaders, rather than they watching televisions. So embed the early warning messages through this existing informal micro network. Next slide, please. So I have control now. Great. So how we can engineer an inclusive alert? So this is just specifically something that I interpret from the statement of one of the DHS club leader in Central Vietnam. I'm just gonna read it for you all. Deaf individuals are accustomed to images and videos. Reading text can be confusing. Flyers or leaflets should include vivid illustrations, culturally resonant with our community. So what does it mean in action? So it means if you are going to use different signing system, make sure that the signing systems or the sign being used are resonance with the signing system that the targeted populations are using. And then concrete visual evidence, use the very literal, something that mimic something that real coming from real world. So for example, if you want to show where is the if you want to show a life jacket, use a life jacket. Do not use illustration. Do not use animation. Show them the real thing. This is how the real life jacket looks like. And then use universal accent symbols because many of them are very visual oriented. So it means try to use a very stark and literal again symbol. So let's say if you want to say green check mark, so you have to show the green check mark. Do not use fancy to artistic thingy that many designers want to do because we're dealing with something that can be easily interpreted through multiple perspective if people using different signing system. I cannot flat, so probably want to put it in the next slide, please. All right, so this is one of the things that I observe as well. So we need to identify the vulnerability. These are insights that probably going to affect how systems need to be improved if it comes to datafications. So the data, so many DHS community members are not being identified. they probably not being captured in the system. Therefore, it is really hard when early warning systems specifically tailored to them to be sent out. And then direct digital outreach. This is something I have mentioned earlier. We need to use the existing micro social network to directly reach them. And and then the last insight would be building robust social network. This is something I keep telling, I keep hearing, not telling, I keep hearing from the community members that the importance of maintaining a micro social network online through WhatsApp group, through Zello group or Facebook group, because this is something that they always go to at the first place rather than going to the formal or formal hierarchy in the community. And then next slide, please. And this is also something that probably has been mentioned in the report that Flat mentions, and probably some of you who have been working with disabled communities have kind of familiar with this concept of joint training and co-design. This is something that they keep telling me about the importance of co-designing. The question is, when co-designing started. So co-designing should start from the beginning to the end, not just when we already have the prototype, then we test it out to them. And another things that they also warned me is about the sustainability of the co-designing and joint training. So of course, this is a classic challenge that always come up when we're working with the community, the lacking of funding, the lacking of resources. People come and go, and there is no meaningful regeneration or transfer of knowledge from people who already gained the knowledge to the people who are still learning about early warning messages. And we cannot break the circuit of information poverty in a vacuum. The future early warning is about making things together. And next slide, please. And within the last few months, I was in Indonesia, and then I was kind of trying to extrapolate the insight I found from Vietnam in the context of Indonesia. So in Indonesia, I live probably about 10 kilometers from an active volcano. And then I was kind of observing how the insight from Vietnam can be transferred to different contexts in Southeast Asia. So this is kind of like more like an explorations how some of the ideas that I have captured from Vietnam can be adapted to different contexts in Indonesia, especially if it has involved the identity and their experience of the deaf experience. I think I'm just going to stop right there. Looking forward to discussions.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Abdul. Yeah, really great, presentation and great research, and all the important findings about the role of trusted networks and community kind of existing community networks and existing community infrastructure and how it plays important role in early warning dissemination. And now from Vietnam, if you have any burning questions to Abdul, again, utilize the Q&A feature. Post your questions there, and then after all the presentations, we'll get back to your question. And now from Vietnam, we're gonna move on to Eswatini, and I want to hand it over to Felix Mamba from University of Eswatini for his presentation. Felix, over to you. You're muted, so if you can unmute yourself.
Thank you, Val. I hope you're able to see my presentation on your end.
Yes, we can
Thank
see
you,
it.
thank you. Thank you so much for the opportunity. And thank you to everyone who has joined our discussion. Appreciation to the presenter who has just taken us through what they were doing in his own context. So I will take you through what we did in Eswatini. Of course, I'm Felix Mamba from the University of Eswatini. Our research was looking at barriers that are responsible for non-actionability of early warning messages, and of course, the challenges that are faced by last mile communities in accessing early warning messages. So basically, that's generally what the study was focusing on, just to look at the barriers and, of course, actionability issues with regards to early warning messages, and, of course, some of the policy recommendations that can be drawn from these results or from this study, just to ensure that early warning messages is not just received, but also actioned upon, and whatever is a stumbling block to those issues needed to be uncovered for a proper response to early warning messages. So this is basically how the entire discussion is outlined. Firstly, it's just to look at the question of what does it mean when we are talking about meaningful coverage in early warning systems, and the effectiveness of such information in reaching communities. And also, just to give you a brief appreciation of the context in Eswatini, where this study was conducted, so that you can appreciate the importance of proper access to information, as well as proper interpretation of the received signal by the local communities. And of course, I'll take you through briefly the approach that was actually used to try to uncover some of these facts about early warning messages in the local context. Of course, when we talk about meaningful coverage in early warning, we are not just talking about successful delivery of a signal, but we are also talking about the ability of communities to be able to interpret this signal that they have received. Most importantly, translate this into action, because what is important is to build resilience against shocks that are basically a challenge in these communities. And of course, the research tried to also evaluate whether communities or households possess the necessary information and resources that they need for them to be able to receive and action early warning information. And of course, the issue of trust, because trust is very important to trigger action when it comes to early warning messages. And lastly, it's just to talk about issues of coverage and what that means with regards to early action, early warning. So messages are not just going to be maybe shared across the country, but they must be relevant to the local condition. Most importantly, they must be tailored to the agricultural cycle, which is basically the day-to-day activities that the farmers are actually undertaking for them to be able to take the proper action. So generally, with regards to the issue of early warning reaching communities or people in the local context, in the context of last mile communities in our society. So access to early warning information is very, very critical, as I've already said, because it is actually what should trigger action. And the mode through which this is disseminated is also critical for access issues, but most importantly for proper dissemination, which does not only affect local people, but also how these are able to interpret and issues of language, which language has been used and how has this been packaged. Is it accessible to the last mile communities, less educated people, and those that are less privileged? And of course, there should be that connection between the information disseminated and basically the actions that people need to take anytime they receive a signal. And the issue of trust was also very much highlighted. Now you've got the information, how much do you believe in the signal you have received? Because believing in the signal is critical to trigger action. But if I have doubts on what I have received, definitely I will not act on that information I have received. And that becomes now a challenge in resilience building when it comes to drought conditions within Eswatini and other global south countries. So this is just to appreciate the complexity of the drought challenge in Eswatini. And of course, I know we are not just a unique community, but there are also other challenges in other global south countries, particularly where climatic conditions are a major determinant of livelihood success. So in our context, for example, we are having quite a number of the population of the country relying on rain-fed agriculture. And now you can see the importance now of a proper delivery of early warning messages on whether or not this year should be a year of severe agricultural activities, or there should be that withholding with regards to investment. So the country has really been facing repeated drought condition, and we have the remarkable drought episode that hit the country in 2015. We are still trying to recover from that drought challenge, where the country actually incurred a serious economic loss of over 3 billion malangeni, which is equivalent to the 7% or so of the country's GDP. And so you can see that is generally a challenge for the country, and there is a need for a proper early warning and, of course, information dissemination that will trigger action to try to build resilience. Of course, this intersects with other challenges in the country: high poverty rates, water shortages, land degradation. I mean, all these, they interact together to create a challenge for the country, making the country to be one of the most vulnerable populations in terms of climate extremes. So generally, the golden scope was basically to evaluate the effectiveness of current communication channels with regards to early warning information in rural Eswatini, and also, of course, identify the barriers, technical, institutional, that are basically providing a stumbling block with regards to communication and also active response to early warning messages. And of course, developing a framework now that will really inform some of our approaches, which will be culturally relevant and also, I mean, locally adapted, became very, very critical for our study. This is just highlighting the approaches that were used basically here. Firstly, we did what we call a risk profiling, just to ensure that we target those communities that are really in this hotspot, maybe areas of the drought episode within the country, which is the Lubombo region, in the Shiselweni region of Eswatini. Of course, these are communities that are really, really having a challenge with regards to access to information because of their geographic location, but most importantly, because of their education level. And as well, for them to actually accept the information, it has to be, repackaged to the level of their understanding for them to be able to actually action on that information. And of course, like I've said, this is an agri-dependent community where the main form of livelihood is agriculture. So that's basically the targeted population. And of course, the design was mixed method. So we did have a survey where we had to visit close to 796 homesteads, just face-to-face data collection processes, and of course, some insights from some of the key informants, which include community leaders, including household heads, community motivators, and so many other players with regards to early warning information, such as the Met department within our local context. And of course, we did have some group discussions with several different people, which we felt are very important to be part of the information gathering process. This is basically a highlight of some of the key findings. One of the key findings was that definitely there was that disconnect that was actually discovered between the information received and what the people receive as a signal and the action of what they have received. So basically, if you look at this, it's showing people who actually indicated access to information. So in a percentage form, there was just 75% who said, no, we are able to access information. So access here being the physical, maybe accessing of the information. We are able to receive a signal from through the radio channels. We are able to get this from through the media, depending on their preferred mode of transmission. And of course, among these, we do have others who receive and utilize. So these ones were actually making around 80% of the population. Then the rest did not actually action the information. And of course, we did have also gender disparities. This basically shows how much women and the other marginalized groups are actually having a challenge in accessing information and actioning this information. Again, this talks about the importance of balancing the gender dynamics with regards to information circulation and understanding of early warning messages. And of course, even the age was also one of the factors that determined access. So basically, one would just highlight that it was very important for actually us to then make recommendations that are aligning with some of these gaps that were actually identified with regards to early warning messages within the context of Eswatini. So among the gaps that were actually identified, of course, it was the language barrier. So I hope you can all understand that in our local context, usually we receive information through the second language, which in this case is the English. And we do have people now in these local communities who are not actually privy to the English language as a medium of communication. They're actually used to the local language, which is Siswati, but the messages are usually communicated in English, which in this case is a foreign language, if I can put it that way. They're not able to access this information. But also the other issue here is the issue of empowering the communities now to be able to respond effectively to the information, not just to receive it, but let it be packaged in a way that it will trigger action, because these are farmers. If you're talking about above normal and normal rainfall, for them that doesn't translate to action because they don't even know what normal rainfall entails. So for them, it's just really to tell them whether they need to go to the field or not just to tell them how much rainfall will be received, because they can't relate that to the local and practical day-to-day life that they are actually going through. And of course, the issue of source credibility was also a major issue that was raised by these local communities. But one thing that maybe one should highlight here is that most communities in our local context, you find that they actually don't understand the issue of probability. So when you are saying to them, we have got 90% chances of rainfall, for them, they want the rain to come. If it doesn't come for them, they can't trust that thing anymore, and they will not act on that signal because for them, that means it is not trustworthy. So again, this talks about the importance of ensuring that there is proper communication to the level of the farmers, but most importantly, there should be a way of awareness raising and the education of the local farmers for them to be able to interpret the information as they should, so that they can actually try to act on the information they've been given. And of course, the absence of feedback mechanism was also an issue that was raised by the local communities. For them, they don't have any space where they can actually share their feelings and their thoughts. So when a research like this one is done, for them is the right time to actually share their feeling and how they feel about the early warning information. So the feedback mechanism to say, this is how we feel about the information you share with us is not actually a platform that they actually have access to. As a result, they tend to look for other options through which they can actually be assisted with regards to information dissemination. Of
Felix,
course,
1 minute warning, so if you can start wrapping it up.
Thank you so much. And of course, there's also the issue of indigenous knowledge. It was actually discovered that most of these communities, they actually get used to using local knowledge for them to be able to at least trigger action. Most of them, they are talking about the credibility of such knowledge for them to be highly credible than what they receive from the Met Department. And of course, that talks about synthesizing modern and indigenous knowledge in such communities. Of course, these are recommendations. One of them will be to ensure that we integrate indigenous knowledge to our local and modern messages and modern systems. Of course, amplify and simplify the messages that we are sharing with these people to make sure that it's accessible for them. And lastly, the feedback mechanism and loops are very, very critical. That's generally among those actionable recommendations. Of course, the issue of ensuring that we have got multi-dissemination platforms for local communities is very, very critical, and ensure that we are also having regulatory frameworks that will integrate indigenous knowledge and local communities. So that's basically it from my end. And thank you so much for your attention. And thank you so much, Val, for the time given. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Felix, for the great presentation. Sorry for cutting, for not giving you enough time to walk us through all the recommendations, but we'll share the presentation, with the entities afterwards, so you can revisit it. Thanks again. And now from Eswatini, we're transferring to Albania, where we'll also look at the early warning systems for remote communities. And I want to hand it over to Ita Bonner from Agricultural University of Tirana for your presentation.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Vlad. Thank you to my colleagues, and thank you to everybody that's connected today to listen to us. I will try and keep it short. So I am addressing now the main topic. You can find the full report open access on the Global Disaster Preparedness Center website, which I believe Vlad will share soon. And if you have any questions now or after the presentation, after the session, please feel free to ask me. I'm always happy to help wherever I can. Next, please. Okay, so the central question we're addressing today is, what does meaningful coverage actually require? So a system can go and can reach the geographic area, but is it really covering it? And when we talk about coverage, we need to identify, address, and also be aware of the people, places, and identities. I will touch upon access, comprehension, and action. Next, please, Vlad. And also humanitarian assistance, which has also been evaluated in the area. Now, for those of you that don't know where Albania is, it's right there. And being located in the Mediterranean coast, it's prone to climate change, has a very high disaster world risk index. That is data from 2023, because the research was conducted in 2024. Is one of the top 20 countries in Europe and Central Asia for disaster displacement. And the studied area is Lezha. And if we move to the next slide, we will also see within the Albanian territory, there is where Lezha district is. I have conducted this research in 3 rural areas. And why is it interesting now? I have deep knowledge of the area. I have written the disaster response plan for children with disabilities for the municipality. And also the area is quite interesting because if you consider during history, during the communist period before 1990, much of the area was reclaimed. So basically it was water, it was dried up, and people were placed there, so it's extremely prone to flooding. And if we move to the next slide, I will bring some of the data we found out. Now, I will not focus on the numbers. However, I will focus on some topics that I can see they are a pattern mentioned by my colleagues previously, which is, how do people receive information? They do receive information mainly using television and news and news channels. Social media is also quite important, but within social media, we need to focus on how relevant the information is it trustworthy, the source of information. Phone calls still very prominent in the area, and text messages is only a small percentage. So if I was advising the government, I would say do not put much effort in text messages, rather spread the message using those channels. Which are the main barriers reported when we talk about access is unstable connection, especially when we have a natural disaster or an extreme weather event. Phone signal, which also we can understand using social media and TV and phone calls. If you do not have phone signal, then it becomes quite challenging to receive the information in the first place. And the information source, which needs to be trusted, and they do not have a reliable information source. If we move to the next slide, I will also explain comprehension. So yes, we receive the information. What do we do with it? Interestingly, but not surprisingly, young people understand information more than other age groups, and you have the data there, and we see that 28 to 37% understand it better, and also understanding and comprehension is also linked to the education level. So if we talk about people that have got the highest education level, primary school, none of them whatsoever responded that they understand it excellently. However, when you go up, university graduates or university level educated, they understand it a lot better. Top comprehension barriers is, again, limited access to internet information, and something else is that when they receive information, it may or may not be clear, but the vast majority of them do not use other resources to improve understanding. And if we move to the next slide, action. What do they need to do? And we found out that 94% of the people we spoke to, they have not taken any measures to prepare for it. And this is not linked to gender, age, or location. So if we cross-reference data, this is not is just that the community is unprepared. And I have quoted one of the community members that answered, and they said that lack of financial means is a major problem, and shelter for the family and livestock, which means we've had, and if we move to the next slide in the meantime, why livestock? Because this is an area with a lot of farmers, a lot of natural land, and in a lot of cases, owners do not accept to leave the area if their livestock is not placed to a secure place. So that poses a danger both to their livelihood as well as to their lives. Humanitarian support and resilience, 84%, obviously not having had the chance to be prepared, they feel not resilient or feel neutral about it. And this is quite important, aid is located in urban centers, so in the center of the city, and which is quite, well, it's quite challenging for people coming from rural areas to reach to the city center, and being geographically and also the roads being blocked and all that. This is something that needs to be addressed, because already vulnerable people in rural areas cannot access information, and if they cannot access aid as well, then that becomes a downward spiral whereby basically they cannot, they're unable to receive help during these situations. If we move to the next slide. I've quoted a few of the respondents. They say that they do not receive information, that they would appreciate if they have community level campaigns to promote awareness and preparedness. Remember, preparedness was one of the major problems. Closer communication with the locals, cooperation between institutions do put out these warning messages, but they just put them as a blanket message, whether or not it goes to rural areas, or if people in the city, in central areas understand it, but they may or may not have the same understanding as rural areas. So if we want to know how, for practitioners, this is, if we want to know how to best approach resilience and comprehension and preparedness, the answers are often, or most of the time within the community. So it's very, very important to go and talk to people that are affected. And I'll go back to what my colleague said, design with, not design for. And if we move to the next slide, practical recommendations, diversify channels, simplify language. This is something that Felix also brought up, that can be challenging for people to understand, and it can be also challenging for the message to be received if the language is technical. If the language is in English, which in Albania is not even a second official language, it's just Albania, so please do spread out the information in the local language. Targeted training exercises, extremely important, requested by the people themselves. They need to be prepared, and the only way to do that is if they practice. So training is often underestimated, but it shouldn't be, is very important. Community engagement, again, design with, not design for, improve humanitarian aid access. Cities are often, or urban areas are often the proximity is closer to where they can get services. Focus in rural areas should be directed to even to informing them, you have a center here, a pop-up center, it will be here. If you need help, you know where to go. And if we move to the next slide, and I hope I am within the time limit, this is the very last slide. Coverage is not enough. So to have meaningful coverage, it requires to reach people through the channels that they actually use, which are not always the same, not even within a country like Albania, a relatively small size country. So the proper channels should be used in the language that they use, both linguistically but also technically. Communities should be trained and should be informed and resourced for them to act. Aid and support needs to be provided in close proximity to these communities, and genuine participation of last mile communities in system design. And thank you very much for your attention. I appreciate that. And yeah, please let me know if you have any questions.
Thank you very much, Ita. Yeah, some stark numbers and that came out from your research that when people receive warnings, like 70% of them say they're too complex or like don't understand them. So yeah, very important reminder for keeping warning messages simple to make sure that people can understand them. All right, well, thank you for all three of our presenters. And now I would like to open the floor for our audience. It's time for your questions and discussions. So yeah, feel free to unmute and ask your question, or if you prefer, just type in your question in the chat or Q&A feature, and yeah, we'll respond. We'll try to take as many questions as possible within the time that we have remaining. Okay, I think I see the Reza raise your hand. Go ahead and ask your question, Reza.
Good evening. Can you hear my voice?
Yes.
Okay. Good evening from Indonesia. Actually, it's it's 8 p.m. Thank you for the opportunity, and thank you for all of the presentation. Actually, my question goes to Mr. Abdul. So as you mentioned in your slide, you mentioned the idea of designing with, not for, which I think clearly requires collaboration between DRR practitioners and the HH leaders. And actually, this is also closely related to the thesis that I'm currently working on, which which focuses on disability inclusive disaster preparedness on a volcanic island in Eastern Indonesia. I guess you visit the western part of Indonesia, but my location is in the eastern part. So the question is, what concrete collaborative mechanism are needed to ensure that the HH communities are not merely consulted as the beneficiaries, but have real authority in designing, translating, and evaluating our early warning messages. For example, like how should roles, resources, and accountability be shared between like the disaster management agencies, local governments, and also DHS organizations. Thank you.
Are you going to do this, Vlad? Do you want me to answer directly, or are you going to
Yeah,
take
yeah, I
up more
think the question
questions?
was addressed to you, yeah. So yeah, go ahead and
Okay.
answer.
Yeah. Hi, Reza. Yes, I was in Indonesia for a few months, precisely in Yogyakarta, and then actually, whenever I go visit Indonesia, I live in Jogja, 10 kilometers from the Merapi volcano. So to answer your questions, I probably mentioned it briefly, but I need to communicate it more clearly. That when we're thinking about designing with, it's the jargon would be inclusions by design. That's the jargons that we use when we're designing mobile apps and we're designing platforms and we're designing messages. So just so what does that mean? So it means we try to bring everybody, not only beneficiary for every single entity and then infrastructures that need it. So for example, when we're thinking about inclusions by design, one of the insights was the resilience from the DSS community. So when everything was kind of preventing them from getting from getting early warning messages immediately or timely, then they kind of working with the hearing individuals, and then they kind of co-develop the materials and then share it with their micro social network through different platforms that fits with their needs. So what does that insight means to us if we want to make this to make inclusions by design, to make it to design with. So rather than trying to think that we are as I identify myself as a hearing individual, so I don't have the lived experience of a non-hearing individuals. And then many designers of early warning messages are coming from hearing communities. So rather than assuming that they know the lived experience of the non-hearing communities, they should identify the kind of organic mechanisms that the members of the community have practiced over time. So let's say if you don't get the early messages are timely, then they are relying on their visuals. So let's say they already identified the pattern. So for example, they know what kind of shape of clouds that might lead to flood. They kind of know what sort of birds that always flying around in the patterns and that it's going to lead to earthquake. They kind of know what sort of animals that's kind of climb down the mountain when the volcano eruptions, the volcano might erupt, that kind of thing. So it means we are trying to understand their life experience, how they actually cope with the limited informations, and then that kind of insights from the internal community that we need to capture as a designer, and then not kind of like imposing our assumptions, but we kind of capture what they already know, and then how we can make it more transferable to different communities, especially those who are, let's say, using different signing system. I hope that answered the question. I'm sorry if that doesn't give you like sufficient information.
Thank you for the answer.
Yeah, I don't know, Felix and Ida, if you have anything else to add on this issue of like co-creation with the community, and if there are like what are some practical kind of approaches or methodologies or ways we can like authorities or whoever is designing early system can get can ensure kind of genuine community participation.
Yes, if I may, very briefly, thank you, Abdul. That is, well, Abdul explained it quite well. I would say also, it is different, a different approach that needs to be used with men and women, with communities, with people with disabilities. So the research and the communication should be different, should be approached differently. As a standard, I would say a survey, it's a very good initial step. And then community groups and working groups, so meetings face to face with representatives from certain communities would be the second step to narrow down what has been found from the surveys, and also to receive other suggestions that we might not have received or grasped or captured with the surveys. That would be the methodology, the most straightforward. And then how you choose the population and all that, we need to be quite careful about the number, representation, probability, non-probability, but that goes very technical. I'm happy to talk to any of you that would like to go deeper into that. But yeah, these two suggestions would be my suggestions. Thank you.
Felix, anything else to add? Or should we move on?
No, I think they've just, covered everything. Again, the nature of your study will also determine exactly the approach that will be relevant to that local condition. I think they've just said everything. Thank you.
Thank you.
Vlad, can I just say a quick thing? So this is probably important to those who are in the field. Those who are in the field, it is really important to be able to have an arsenal of data collections. So let's say we're dealing with human, right? We're dealing with humans, regardless of their abilities, regardless of their gender. We need to observe them, their behaviors, and understand their life experience, and then how they interact with the nature. Especially if it's involved natural disaster. We cannot just say, we have the equipment, the government has the database, the GIS people has the pattern and everything. But as Ita and then Felix mentioned, we also need to understand the behavior of the people, and then people are not predictable. We have to understand. So for example, if you're following a group of DSS people, they already have an organic way to identify and to understand the language of the nature. But if you're looking at the blind and visually impaired, they're going to have different ways of resilience, the different ways of protecting themselves and others, as well as women or disabled women living in the highlands, for example. They have different ways of saving themselves from the volcano eruptions compared to women living in urban areas. Let's say that is kind of things that people on the ground who want to make the early warning messages designed to be more inclusive, they need to have that kind of creativity to understand human behavior.
Thank you. Thank you for your addition, Abdul. All right, next question. Again, as I said, feel free to unmute and ask, or if you're shy, just drop your question in the chat. Okay, but if we don't have any questions from the audience, then maybe I'll use my powers as a moderator, and I want to ask Felix. I know I cut you a little bit short when you were talking about the indigenous knowledge and the role of indigenous knowledge in early warning system. So I kind of wanted to ask you to maybe expand a little bit on that, and how, in the community that you studied, like how was the indigenous and local knowledge used for early warning? What kind of indicators people used? And also maybe you have some suggestions or recommendations how national alerting authorities or Met offices can kind of tap into this community wisdom to make sure to make warnings more trusted and more relevant for people in those communities.
Thank you so much, Val. Yes, in fact, with regards to indigenous knowledge, most of rural households, not just in Eswatini, but in most countries, particularly in Southern Africa, which includes, Zimbabwe, where I've actually been working also with my colleagues there, Botswana, Lesotho, and South Africa even. You find that they actually have got certain indicators that they actually use, which includes, for example, the shape and size of the moon. They also use, birds, certain bird species, and also they use certain plants and, of course, certain herbs to actually detect how the weather system would look like. And actually, what we have discovered is that most of these indigenous knowledge indicators, they are actually having a scientific relevance and explanation when you study carefully some of these indicators. For example, if I may share maybe this slide, if that would be okay, just to show a few of these animals that are normally used in the context of Eswatini. I'm sure you can relate to some of these maybe as the audience maybe within this call. Now, if you look, for example, at this slide, you have this this bird. This bird actually is once it calls, there will definitely be a rain. They normally call it a rainbird. Of course, we do have a local name for this bird. So anytime this bird calls, you know that there will be rain that is going to come. And actually, even in the climate change era, it still proves to be very, very reliable. And after having done a study on indigenous knowledge, I've actually myself tried to track these animals to record. I have a list of recorded, I would say, days and dates where this bird called, and I observed how the weather looked like on that given day. And 98% of the time when it calls, the rain was received. We also have got some of these plants, like, for example, this drought-berry. Once this drought-berry fruits extensively, that is a signal of a drought year. And the rural communities, once they see this type of plant fruiting heavily, then they already know that they're approaching a drought season, and they start preparing themselves for that drought season. And we also have got this, for example, just below the drought-berry, you have got that we call it umhlonhlo in the local language. So this tree, what it does is, if there will be a rain, it will just flower. As you look at it right now, it has no flower, but when there is rain that is imminent, it will just flower. And anytime they see it flowering, they know the rain is going to come. And of course, the shape and size of the moon. So if the moon faces certain directions, they normally call it a crescent moon, then they know that the rain is going to come. So briefly, what I can just highlight here is that now these local people, what they do, they normally receive the signal. For those who are able to receive the signal from MET or the early warning, then they will observe some of these locally available indicators. If they will be the same language spoken by these two, sort of a validation process, then they will act because they will trust that whatever they are receiving will be correct. And in the instance where they can't reach the signal, they will rely on this indigenous knowledge. So what basically is happening or should happen now is basically integration of the two, because of course the indigenous people believe so much in these traditional indicators, and it's somehow reliable as far as they are concerned. It is one of the most reliable indicators they can actually trust. So they keep then switching between the two. And of course, if there's one not to trust, it should be the modern system, as opposed to the traditional system that they've been using actually even before the modern system began to take place. Yeah, so that is basically what I can just share maybe with you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Felix. And yeah, to our audience, if you're interested to learn more about the role of indigenous knowledge and traditional practices, make sure you join our next webinar because we'll kind of take a deeper dive into those questions. And I saw that Edith posted a question in the chat. In areas where there is no mobile network or internet coverage, what alternative solutions can be used to deliver agricultural and livestock-related messages that typically rely on mobile phones and internet services? I guess, yeah, Felix, it's to you since your study focused more on like farming communities, but then Abdul and Ita, feel free to chime in. Just I'm gonna challenge you to keep it really short because we're running out of time. So
Yeah.
Felix, if you wanna go first.
Yeah, so thank you so much. Actually, we do have those situations. So in my local context, for example, we do have structures that are existing in our communities. For example, community meetings. That is where maybe we can try to disseminate such information where there is less or poor coverage of networks. I think that is maybe the main way in which we can disseminate the information if we really have a challenge of maybe coverage. That's basically what I can just maybe share. I mean, my friends can also contribute to that. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, Abdul, not necessarily for like drought, but you know, for like the context, for the context and like hazards that you studied, what are alternatives to mobile and you know internet coverage, internet sources to deliver early warning messages?
Just three quick things. One, I'm just going to echo what Felix says. We can go back to analog using the existing human infrastructure. And then second, we can also up into making the internet without internet. So there is a possibility to use technology without necessarily having the connection to the internet. So that is possible. But you need to speak with the software engineer first in order to do that. And then third, we can also rely on, again, the analog versions. Back to the 1970s, we use handy-talkie, the similar things. And if it's needed, you can also use a bunch of the things that our ancestors have been using, from using the smokes, from using the fires and things like that. But again, if we are talking about when everything is disconnected, and there is a platform that can still help us to connect when internet connections doesn't work.
Yes, very quickly. In addition to what my colleague said, I would mention radio. At least for the area that I've studied, radio could be a great way to communicate, and community leaders. Extremely important to have. In some areas of Albania, they call them elderlies, not because of the age, but because of the leading role that they have in their community. So these would be the two ways to approach them from my perspective. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, and also just to echo what you just said, from our meta-synthesis, it showed that it's really important to understand the information ecosystem of each individual communities, because in each, you know, community, there may be networks that exist that are super effective and powerful in like, you know, as like local kind of influencers. In one study, there was like a really kind of strong health worker networks, and they were utilized to deliver, you know, early warning messages for people who were kind of excluded from formal networks. So yeah, being aware, it goes back to co-creation and co-design with communities to kind of really understand the existing ecosystem and networks that exist and being able to leverage those for early warnings. Okay, we are at time. And again, thank you so much for all our presenters. Thank you for everyone who attended. We really appreciate your time. And again, I'm gonna send the registration link one more time in the chat. Make sure you are you sign up for the remaining 2 webinars in the series. And yeah, stay on the lookout for the recording and summary that I'm gonna send out. And yeah, if you have any questions to our researchers, feel free to reach out to me and I can share their contact information with you. Again, thank you so much and have a good rest of your day. Bye-bye.